Danny Tank Morrison had built his reputation on the streets of East London through intimidation and violence. At 28, he stood 6 feet 4 inches tall, with arms covered in prison tattoos and scars that told stories of countless street fights. His crew of 5 loyal followers had gathered around him that Tuesday afternoon, all looking for entertainment and easy targets to assert their dominance over. They had spent the morning causing trouble at Camden Market, harassing vendors and tourists until security forced them to move along. Now they found themselves wandering through Westminster, high on cheap alcohol and the thrill of making ordinary people uncomfortable with their presence. Danny thrived on the fear he saw in people's eyes when they crossed the street to avoid his group. "Look at all these posh tourists," sneered Mickey, one of Danny's lieutenants, gesturing toward the crowd gathering near Buckingham Palace. "Bet they'd hand over their wallets quick enough if we asked nicely." The others laughed, but Danny was scanning the area for something more interesting than simple robbery. Wanted to make a statement, something that would get them noticed and talked about. That's when he spotted the Royal Guard standing at his post near the palace gates. Sergeant William Bill Hayes, a decorated veteran of 2 tours in Afghanistan, stood in perfect ceremonial position. At 31, Bill had seen real combat and survived situations that would break most men. His steady breathing and unwavering focus had been honed through years of military training and genuine battlefield experience. Danny's eyes lit up with malicious excitement. Here was the perfect target, someone who couldn't fight back due to ceremonial duties, surrounded by tourists with cameras who would witness his humiliation of a symbol of British authority. "Boys," he said with a cruel grin, "I think we're about to become famous." The group approached the ceremonial area with swagger and loud voices, already drawing disapproving looks from tourists and families. Danny's reputation had been built on picking fights he knew he could win, targeting smaller opponents, using his gang for backup, or confronting people who couldn't defend themselves properly. In his mind, guard bound by ceremonial protocol was the perfect victim. Bill noticed the group's approach through his peripheral vision. His trained eye immediately assessed the threat level, noting their aggressive body language, the way they moved as a pack, and the obvious leader's predatory focus. Years of combat experience had taught him to read dangerous situations long before they escalated, but his current duty required him to maintain ceremonial position. Danny had no idea he was about to challenge someone who had survived Taliban ambushes, IED explosions, and close-quarters combat with trained enemy fighters. To him, the motionless guard looked like an easy target dressed up in a fancy costume, someone whose job was to stand still and look pretty for tourists. The biggest mistake of Danny's criminal career was about to unfold, and he was walking straight into it with complete confidence. The afternoon sun beat down on the gathering crowd as Danny's crew formed a loose circle around him, their voices growing louder and more aggressive. Tourists began backing away, sensing trouble brewing, while parents pulled their children closer. Bill remained perfectly still, but every muscle in his battle-hardened body was coiled and ready. The calm before the storm was about to end violently. Danny strutted up to Bill with exaggerated confidence, his crew forming a semicircle behind him. The tourists in the immediate area began backing away, sensing the tension building. Parents grabbed their children's hands while elderly visitors looked around nervously for security personnel. Danny fed off their discomfort, feeling his power grow with each worried glance. Well, what do we have here?" Danny announced loudly, his voice carrying across the square. "Get this toy soldier all dressed up for the kiddies." His crew laughed on cue, though some of them seemed less certain as they noticed the guard's impressive physical build beneath the ceremonial uniform. Danny was too caught up in his performance to notice their hesitation. Bill's breathing remained steady and controlled, his eyes fixed straight ahead as protocol demanded. But his peripheral vision tracked every member of the group automatically, cataloging potential threats and escape routes. His military training had taught him that the loudest aggressor was often not the most dangerous. But in this case, the leader's size and obvious experience with violence made him a legitimate concern. "I said look at me when I'm talking to you," Danny shouted, stepping closer until he was just inches from Bill's face. The smell of alcohol and cigarettes was overwhelming, but Bill didn't flinch. His stillness seemed to frustrate Danny, who was accustomed to getting immediate reactions from his targets. Most people would have shown fear or backed down by now. Mickey moved closer, emboldened by his leader's aggression. Maybe he can't hear you, Tank. Maybe we need to speak louder. The gang member reached out to poke Bill's chest with his finger, testing the boundaries. The moment his finger made contact, Bill's eyes flicked down for just a fraction of a second. A subtle warning that went completely unnoticed by the thugs. A crowd of onlookers had formed at a safe distance, many with phones raised to record what they assumed would be harassment of a helpless ceremonial guard. Some called for security, while others simply watched in morbid fascination. None of them realized they were about to witness something very different from the expected bullying scenario. Danny's frustration grew with each second of Bill's unresponsive stance. In prison and on the streets, his intimidation tactics had deepest tactics had never failed to produce fear, submission, or at least anger he could exploit. This complete lack of reaction was something new and infuriating. You think you're better than us, don't you? He snarled. Standing there in your fancy dress-up clothes, thinking you're some kind of hero? Bill's training kicked in as he assessed the escalating situation. These weren't political protesters or confused tourists. They were experienced criminals looking for violence. The leader's movement patterns and the way he carried himself suggested significant fighting experience. It's probably learned in prison. The others were followers, dangerous in a pack but likely to scatter if their leader went down. The fatal flaw in Danny's plan was his complete misunderstanding of his target. He saw the ceremonial uniform and rigid posture as signs of weakness and constraint, never imagining that the man inside had been forged in actual combat. Bill had faced down enemy fighters armed with AK-47s and rocket-propelled grenades. A street thug with anger management issues barely registered as a threat. As Danny prepared to escalate the confrontation further, he made the classic mistake of assuming his opponent's restraint indicated inability to fight. The crowd held its collective breath, phones recording as the dangerous miscalculation reached its tipping point. Danny was about to discover the difference between street tough and combat veteran in the most painful way possible. Danny's patience reached its limit when Bill continued to ignore his increasingly hostile taunts. The lack of response felt like mockery to someone whose entire identity is built on commanding fear and respect through intimidation. He had never encountered anyone who could maintain such complete composure in the face of his threats, and it was undermining his authority in front of his crew. Right, that's enough, Danny shouted, grabbing the front of Bill's ceremonial tunic with both hands. I said, look at me when I'm speaking to you. The physical contact crossed a line that Bill's training recognized immediately. The situation had officially moved from harassment to direct confrontation, and the rules of engagement had just changed completely. Bill's eyes shifted to meet Danny's for the first time, and something in that steady gaze should have warned the criminal that he had just made a terrible mistake. There was no fear, no anger, just the cold assessment of a professional soldier evaluating a threat. But Danny was too caught up in his rage to read the warning signs that were clear to everyone else watching. The crowd gasped as Danny shook Bill by his uniform, trying to provoke a reaction. There we go. Finally got your attention, didn't I? Danny's crew cheered him on, though some of them were beginning to notice that other guards in the area were shifting their positions slightly.
Ow.
Security personnel were also moving closer, though. They hadn't yet intervened. Mickey stepped forward to join his leader, emboldened by Danny's apparent success. Yeah, not so impressive now, are you? But as he reached out to grab Bill's other arm, he noticed something that made his confidence waver. The guard's hands, previously held in perfect ceremonial position, had subtly adjusted their grip. They were now positioned in a way that suggested combat training rather than parade ground protocol. Bill's mind automatically calculated angles of response, potential weapons, and escape routes while maintaining his outward composure. Danny's grip on his uniform was actually providing an advantage. The criminal had committed both hands to holding him, limiting his own defensive options. The amateur mistake of someone who had never faced a truly dangerous opponent. Nothing but someone playing dress-up. Danny continued his tirade, pulling Bill closer to his face. The smell of alcohol was overwhelming, and Bill could see the dilated pupils that suggested other substances as well. This wasn't just hostility, it was chemically enhanced recklessness that made Danny even more unpredictable and dangerous. The tipping point came when Danny decided to escalate further. "Maybe I should mess up that fancy uniform of yours," he sneered, raising his right hand as if to strike Bill's face. It was the moment Bill had been waiting for, clear hostile intent. That justified defensive action under military protocols and civilian law. Time seemed to slow as Danny's hand moved toward Bill's face. The criminal was completely focused on humiliating his victim, never considering that the man he was confronting had reflexes honed by life-and-death situations. Years of combat training compressed into split-second reactions that Danny's street fighting experience couldn't possibly match. Bill's response was instantaneous and decisive. Before Danny's hand could complete its arc, the guard's left hand shot up in a lightning-fast defensive move that trapped Danny's wrist, while simultaneously striking a pressure point that sent sharp pain shooting up his arm. The technique was designed to disable opponents quickly and efficiently, and Danny's shocked expression showed he had never experienced anything like it. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the tables turned completely in the span of a heartbeat. Danny's confident hostility crumbled into confusion and pain as he realized he had vastly underestimated his opponent. The ceremonial guard he had thought was helpless was revealing himself to be something far more formidable than any street criminal. Bill's counterattack was a masterclass in controlled violence. With Danny's wrist trapped and his arm temporarily paralyzed, Bill smoothly transitioned into a takedown technique that used the thug's own momentum against him. Danny found himself airborne for a brief, terrifying moment before crashing hard onto the cobblestones, the impact driving the air from his lungs. The speed and precision of the move left Danny's crew momentarily stunned. Mickey, who had been moving to help his leader, froze mid-step as he watched their seemingly invincible boss crumple to the ground like a rag doll. The other gang members looked at each other uncertainly, their pack mentality wavering as their alpha was so decisively neutralized. Danny lay on his back, gasping for breath and staring up at Bill in complete shock. His right arm felt like it was on fire from whatever the guard had done to his wrist, and his back ached from the impact with the stone pavement. For the first time in years, Danny felt truly vulnerable and outmatched. The guard stood over him, still in perfect ceremonial posture, as if nothing had happened. "Stay down," Bill said quietly, his voice carrying an authority that came from years of commanding soldiers in combat situations. The simple words contained a promise of further violence if Danny was foolish enough to continue the confrontation. The tone was calm and professional, which somehow made it even more intimidating than shouting would have been. Mickey finally found his voice, though it came out as more of a croak. "Tank, you all right, mate?" But even as he spoke, he was backing away from Bill. The demonstration of skill had completely shattered his confidence, and he was beginning to realize they had picked a fight with someone far beyond their capabilities. Crowd that had gathered to watch what they thought would be harassment began cheering and applauding. Phones captured every moment as tourists realized they were witnessing something extraordinary. The ceremonial guard, who had seemed so passive and helpless, had revealed himself to be incredibly dangerous when pushed to the breaking point. Danny tried to roll over and get to his feet, his pride refusing to accept the humiliation. "Bed." Moment he started to rise, Bill's boot pressed firmly against his chest, pinning him to the ground without apparent effort. The pressure was precise enough to keep Danny down, but not enough to cause serious injury. It was the restraint of a professional soldier, not a street brawler. "I said, stay down," Bill repeated. And this time, Danny heard the steel beneath the quiet tone. He had encountered dangerous men in prison, but there was something different about this guard's confidence. It came from genuine competence rather than bluff and bluster. Danny's survival instincts, honed through years of criminal activity, were screaming at him to submit. Security personnel finally arrived. They slowed their approach when they saw the situation was already under control. Bill's fellow guards had also moved closer, forming a loose perimeter that prevented Danny's crew from attempting a rescue. The gang members found themselves facing multiple trained soldiers. and their numerical advantage suddenly felt meaningless. Inspector James Crawford, a veteran police officer who had responded to similar incidents, approached with his hand resting on his radio. He had expected to find a harassment situation that required arrests and paperwork. Instead, he found a textbook example of justified self-defense by someone who had used exactly the right amount of force to neutralize a threat. "All right, what's the situation here?" Crawford asked, though the scene was fairly self-explanatory. Danny lay pinned beneath Bill's boot. His gang stood nervously at a distance, and dozens of tourists had video evidence of exactly what had transpired. It was one of the clearest cases of justified force Crawford had seen in years, Bill maintained. His position over Danny while giving his report to the inspector, his voice remained calm and professional as he described the escalation from harassment to physical assault. The crowd of witnesses nodded in agreement, many offering to provide video evidence that supported the guard's account completely. Danny was hauled to his feet by two police officers, his legs still shaky from the impact and the realization of how badly he had misjudged the situation. His wrist throbbed with pain, and his back felt like he had been hit by a truck. The confident, the swagger that had carried him through years of criminal activity was completely gone, replaced by genuine fear and confusion. Inspector Crawford had reviewed the phone footage from 3 different tourists, all showing the same clear sequence of events. Danny's unprovoked assault on the guard, followed by Bill's measured defensive response, created an open and shut case that would satisfy any prosecutor. The video evidence was so clear that Danny's public defender would likely advise him to plead guilty immediately. Daniel Morrison, Crawford read from Danny's identification, 34 arrests, including assault, robbery, and intimidation. "Seems like you finally picked on someone who could handle themselves." Danny remained silent, still trying to process how quickly his planned humiliation of a ceremonial guard had turned into his own complete defeat. Mickey and the rest of Danny's crew were also being arrested, though their charges would be lighter, since they hadn't actually participated in the physical assault. As the handcuffs clicked shut around their wrists, each gang member was quietly reconsidering their life choices. Their supposedly invincible leader had been taken down by a single guard in less than 5 seconds. The crowd continued to film and photograph as Danny was loaded into the police van. His reputation on the streets of East London would be forever damaged by this public humiliation. Word would spread quickly through the criminal networks about Tank Morrison getting dropped by a palace guard, and his ability to intimidate others, through fear, would be permanently compromised. Bill returned to his ceremonial position once the scene was cleared. Though his commanding officer approached for a brief discussion about the incident, the takedown had been textbook perfect, using minimal force to neutralize the threat without causing serious injury. It would be used as a training example for other ceremonial guards facing similar situations. News crews arrived within an hour, drawn by social media posts of the confrontation. The story quickly became a sensation. Royal Guard's school street thug dominated headlines across multiple news outlets. Interviews with witnesses painted Bill as a professional hero who had protected tourists while maintaining the dignity of his ceremonial duties. Danny sat in his holding cell at Westminster Police Station, his head in his hands as the full magnitude of his mistake became clear. His solicitor, Mr. Peterson, reviewed the charges with barely concealed frustration. "Daniel, the evidence against you is overwhelming. Multiple video angles, dozens of witnesses, and you attacked a serving member of Her Majesty's forces. Looking at serious prison time." The local newspaper in Danny's neighborhood ran the story on their front page, complete with still images from the tourist videos showing him flat on his back with the guard's boot on his chest. His mother, who had spent years defending her son's behavior to neighbors and social workers, finally stopped making excuses. Even she couldn't spin this level of public humiliation into anything remotely acceptable back in the East London pubs. Where Danny's crew used to hold court, the mood was somber. Word had spread quickly about their leader's defeat. Rival gangs were already moving to claim territory that Danny could no longer defend effectively. His reputation as someone to be feared was replaced overnight by ridicule and mockery. The incident report filed by Inspector Crawford noted that Sergeant Hayes had shown exemplary restraint and professionalism in dealing with an unprovoked assault. The guard's response had been proportionate, controlled, exactive, exactly what was expected from someone with his training and experience. Danny, meanwhile, faced charges that would likely result in his longest prison sentence yet. As night fell over London, Bill finished his ceremonial duty and returned to barracks, where his fellow soldiers treated him to drinks and congratulations. Danny spent the night on a narrow prison cot, wondering how his plan to humiliate a guard had instead become the most humiliating moment of his own criminal career. 6 months later, Danny was serving an 18-month sentence at Pentonville Prison, his third stint behind bars, but his first for assaulting a member of the military. The viral videos of his humiliation had followed him into prison, where even hardened criminals mocked him for picking a fight he couldn't win. His reputation as a feared street boss had evaporated completely. The prison hierarchy that Danny had once navigated with confidence now worked against him. Other inmates saw his defeat by a single guard as a sign of weakness, and several younger criminals were actively challenging his authority. The swagger and intimidation tactics that had served him on the outside were useless when everyone had seen video evidence of his vulnerability. Mickey had received a 6-month sentence for his role in the incident and was released 2 months. Before Danny, instead of waiting for his former leader, he had quickly aligned himself with a rival gang that was eager to absorb Danny's former territory. The rest of Danny's crew had scattered 2 different criminal organizations, abandoning their loyalty the moment it became a liability. Bill continued his ceremonial duties, though he had become something of a legend within the military community. The incident had been incorporated into training programs as an example of proper threat assessment and controlled response. He received commendations from his commanding officers and was selected for an advanced leadership course based partly on his handling of the situation. The East London neighborhoods that had once feared Danny's presence gradually became safer. As his criminal network collapsed, local business owners who had paid protection money to his gang found themselves free from intimidation for the first time in years. Community leaders credited the public nature of Danny's defeat with discouraging other would-be gangsters from filling the power. Vacuum Inspector Crawford used the case in training seminars for new police officers, highlighting how clear video evidence and professional witness testimony could create bulletproof prosecutions. The incident had become a textbook example of justified self-defense and proper police response to assault situations. Danny's mother, Margaret Morrison, had stopped visiting him in prison after the first month. The shame of seeing her son's defeat, replayed on television news and social media, had finally broken her denial about his criminal lifestyle. She moved to a different part of London to escape the constant reminders of her son's public humiliation. The tourist videos of the incident continued to circulate online, accumulating millions of views and spawning countless reaction videos and analysis pieces. Military training experts used the footage to demonstrate the difference between street fighting and professional combat training. Danny's 5 seconds of fame had become a permanent testament to his poor judgment. Bill was promoted to company sergeant major 6 months after the incident, recognizing both his exemplary service record and his handling of the confrontation. He used his elevated position to mentor younger soldiers, emphasizing the importance of restraint and proportional response when dealing with civilian threats. In his prison cell, Danny finally had time to reflect on the path that had led him. To this point, years of choosing violence over legitimate work, intimidation over respect, and criminal shortcuts over honest effort had culminated in his complete public humiliation. The system he had tried to fight against had barely noticed his existence, while the individual he had tried to victimize had demonstrated superior training and discipline as his release date approached. Danny faced the reality that his criminal empire no longer existed. His reputation was destroyed, his crew had abandoned him, and his territory had been carved up by rivals. The 5 seconds of violence that were supposed to enhance his status had instead ended his criminal career, more effectively than any police investigation or prison sentence ever could. The incident served as a powerful reminder that ceremonial duties didn't make soldiers any less dangerous, and that picking fights with trained professionals rarely ended well for amateur thugs. Worst decision had indeed been targeting Sergeant Bill Hayes, and the consequences would follow him for the rest of his life.